Hi, so my name is Antonio D'Amelio, and today I'll be acting the part of a medical professional, answering some questions from a concerned parent. Playing the part of the parent, I have Isabel Dunning here.
Hello.
So, Izzo, what are some questions that you're having? What can I help you out with here?
So, firstly, I was just wondering that I heard from some friends that vaccines contain mercury. Isn't that dangerous?
So, this is actually something that's not really true in the United States anymore. In the past, we used to have a preservative called thimerosal, and thimerosal was used in some vaccines in order to prevent different microbes and stuff from growing in them, prevent them from going bad while they sat for extended periods of time. But due to concerns over the safety of mercury, we actually took this out um, in like 1998 or 1999, and by the time 2001 rolled around, we actually had no more storage of any vaccines with thimerosal in them. So this is actually not even a concern anymore. But there's actually been extensive research into the roles of the mercury that's within thimerosal, and it's been discovered that the mercury within thimerosal is ethyl mercury, not methyl mercury. Methyl mercury is actual harmful mercury, stuff that can really do damage to you, but ethyl mercury is benign. It really doesn't do anything to you. And so it's just really there to enhance it as a preservative. But due to the fact that it's not even present in vaccines anymore, this really shouldn't be a concern. So what other questions can I help you out with?
Okay, so secondly, there are very few cases of these diseases like polio and other fun diseases like found in the MMR vaccine. So, isn't the risk to my child pretty low? Do I really need to vaccinate them?
So yes, it is true that there's very few of these cases in the modern day. Perfect example being diphtheria that used to be one of the biggest killers in the world. We've only had um, less than 5 cases in the last decade. So yeah, a lot of these things aren't really big in the news anymore. But the reason that they're not prevalent is actually because of the vaccination rates, because we've prevented so many people from getting them. If each individual person starts taking it upon themselves to decide, well, I don't really need it because it's not really useful. I don't want to get a shot. I don't like needles. The diseases are still present. You can still get a lot of these diseases, and they can make a resurgence. And we've already seen that in a couple different communities. Last year, there was a huge outbreak of measles in New York when a community decided to stop vaccinating for measles. So the risk for these diseases is still very real. They're still present diseases, and so getting the minor inconvenience of a shot or a minor fever to prevent the risk of these diseases is very significant because these diseases used to destroy entire towns. Literal and families just wiped off the map. People used to think back in the day that a woman wasn't considered a true mother until she lost a child to a diseases that today we can just get rid of with a shot. So, you know, as of is this really necessary? I would say definitely. Any other questions? Do you have any other questions?
Oh, so you were saying how a lot of these diseases like polio and diphtheria are really dangerous, but what about like chickenpox? That's not really dangerous. Wouldn't it just be better for my child to get natural immunity?
Um, in certain cases, natural immunity might be better. In fact, natural immunity is stronger than certain vaccines, but in most scenarios, this is actually just not a very good idea because natural immunity, while it may be stronger, does involve you actually having to deal with this disease. So, for example, if you take chickenpox, you're going to have to deal with all of the symptoms of chickenpox when your child gets that disease. And then, if your child gets that disease later on down the line, they'll have to deal with shingles and other extremely painful things. So, to have to get something minor with the artificial immunity of vaccines and not have to deal with any of those problems down the line or in the modern day is definitely a far superior option. And the other thing is, if you look at this for other diseases, it just really doesn't make any sense at all because some of these diseases can severely disfigure or even kill your child. You know what I mean? If we look at something like polio, there are 3 different strains of polio that are common, and all of them can seriously, uh, affect your child. They could put them in a wheelchair, make them require iron lungs, which has just kind of fallen out of practice because we don't have so many of these cases anymore. Your child could get meningitis, and we might have to amputate some of their limbs. And then beyond all of this horrible stuff, some of these diseases just don't actually result in natural immunity. And a good example of that is tetanus, because it's a toxoid based disease. It's not the actual bacteria that's harming you, but the toxoid that's produced as a byproduct. We actually don't produce any natural immunity to this. So by giving your child a vaccine that allows them to produce an antibody against this toxoid, we can actually, basically solve a disease that we weren't able to before. So definitely natural immunity is not a better idea in the vast majority of these cases. What other
Alrighty,
questions do you have?
my friend didn't vaccinate her child because he is allergic to eggs. My child has different allergies. Should I still not vaccinate them?
So having allergies is always a concern whenever we are doing any medical procedure. We always want to take that into account. We definitely want to avoid having allergic reactions occur because they're very dangerous and potentially fatal. And the reason your friend had this problem is because vaccines sometimes contain egg proteins. And the reason that they contain egg proteins is because we actually culture the antigens that are within a lot of these vaccines in eggs. Now, that sometimes results in the antigen pulling off a little bit of egg protein with it, which can, in rare instances, cause an allergic reaction. But in this case, we actually still give the vaccine to the individual most of the time, depending on the severity of their allergy. We actually just stand by with an EpiPen and other devices to make sure that we can handle it in case they do have an allergic reaction. But besides this, there are very few other allergens that are really going to be a concern. Pollen and any of that stuff is not really a big issue. Peanuts, none of that. Um, Very rarely there might be an extreme allergic reaction to certain antigens that your child may have, but this is a very uncommon thing. And if this were the case, we would deal with an individual exemption. But the odds that this happens is definitely very low, and we can actually test for this. Do you have any final questions?
Okay, so last night my friend's son got a fever after a vaccine. Why did the vaccine make him sick?
So the thing about the fever, if I might ask, is did the fever last a long time, or was it kind of gone after about 2 or 3 days?
It disappeared pretty quickly.
So the child actually did not get sick. If the child recovered within 2 to 3, even 4 days, what's really happening is they're having the fever as a normal part of their immune response. That just means that the vaccine actually worked. And though it might have been a little bit inconvenient, the child may be very young, so having the fever makes them cry and become distressed, and that might appear very scary. Really, the fever response is just their body attacking the antigens that we put into them with the vaccine. And this is just showing that their body does know how to deal with this antigen now. And in the future, instead of having a serious disease like diphtheria or polio or anything like that, if they do get exposed to it, instead of having that major reaction, their body will ramp up really quick with a secondary, an adaptive immune response, and will be able to deal with it. So having to deal with a minor fever, not really a sickness, just fever as a byproduct, is really kind of an acceptable consequence to vaccines, given how important the protection that it offers is. Any of these diseases would have far worse consequences than the minor 2-day fever that the child is dealing with.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So from this, these are any references that I may have linked to during my presentation. If you have any other additional questions, feel free to contact me. Thank you for your time.